Dialed in.
Yeah, it's all dialed in. It's recording.
All right.
Well, hey guys, thanks for coming. I don't have to talk tonight, which is great. I get to just sit back, have fun. Don't talk to me. Talk to these guys. This is Adam.
Awesome.
He is from A to Z Toys. Has anybody been to A to Z Toys? Hey.
Lots of
We
familiar
have lots of
faces.
people that need to go to A to Z
Yeah.
Toys. So it's nice to hear. So anyway,
This is my buddy Mark. He is as big of a toy nerd as I am. He runs, you see the Toy Archives logo up there. It's a site, pet project that's been in the works for a little while. That's just another very active toy collector that's been doing it for a while. So we're just gonna kind of ramble on about some toys, talk about some of the most popular things or the most common things that you see in toy collecting. And if you guys have any questions or anything like that, just let us know. We'll be running through some different pictures stuff up here too. So
yeah, we put this together really kind of, I mean, there's a whole, just like in comics, right? There are so many different ways that people can, people collect, right? People collect either maybe key issues, high grades, a little of everything. You want to put the whole run together, whatever it might be. The same is true really in toy collecting. So we tried to kind of put this together to walk through, maybe not traditional, but what a toy collecting kind of journey starts out as. So similar for both of us, and anybody who really gets into toy collecting seems to follow a similar path, and then they might focus on one area or another a little bit more. So we kind of modeled this in that same journey-ish, but there's lots of interesting things. A lot of the things in here came from our personal collections. We can talk more about any of them, so definitely stop us throughout if you've got questions or whatever as we go. All right, we did that already. So just kind of where does it come from, right? Just like in comics, a lot of us have whether it's toys or comics, you remember them as a kid, the nostalgia's there, right? And that's pretty much why most of us collect now. Everybody's got different reasons. These were too classic to not share. So this was, I think shortly before Christmas, and that cute little kid sitting on the box turned into this, sitting up here, which is a shame, which is a complete shame. So that's me and my brother. I'm the one sitting on the box, and we were very fortunate, obviously, to have G.I. Joe Defiant, which is like one of the biggest play sets that you can buy.
think of all the value that is getting lost by a kid sitting on that box right there.
So whose Defiant was it? Was it you? Or
Well, since you asked, so my brother had, I don't even remember the name of it, but it was some disease. He was like temporarily paralyzed from like the chest down as a kid, and so when he was in the hospital, like my parents were like felt so terrible for him. We were basically like, "What do you got? Yeah, you've handled this so well. What do you want?"
What is the biggest toy?
Yeah. So they had to special order it. They special ordered it through.
Wasn't the flag available?
Yeah, it was between.
This box is about as big as
Number
the
3 out of the
flag.
biggest.
Like it's pretty absurd.
I didn't know that thing was that big.
Oh yeah, it's
colossal. Yeah.
a funny little aside about that Defiant too. Me and him actually met because he still got the box of that. He still got that thing. A couple years ago, or about 3 years ago, in Chicago at a toy show, saw the box, was so blown away because you never see it in person, and had to go up and start chatting with him. And as we were talking, realized, oh, he lives in Marion and I live in Cedar Rapids, and yet we met in Chicago at a toy show because of that. Then we've both been terrible for each other, spending each other's money on toys ever since. So it's been.
You still have the Defiant though.
I do, yeah. So what's funny is my parents are collectors of antiques and different things. My dad was really big into toys, so a handful of the stuff that I've gotten kind of inherited from him was some Star Wars stuff, and then he of course bought a lot of G.I. Joe stuff, so they buy us G.I. Joe stuff to play with. And then I found just a year ago or so, we were cleaning out some stuff at my parents' place, and found they'd buy us a figure to play with, and then they would buy a carded one and just set it aside, and they kept them long. So now I've got a pretty significant G.I. Joe carded collection that, I've got. It was funny because they had I don't know if a lot of you have been in town for a long time, but Farmore used to be over off of, was it Blairsbury or Collins or whatever, right over across from Windy Mall.
The half-price bookstore.
That's right, yeah. So still in a Farmore bag, had the Farmore
That's
receipt,
awesome.
$2.99 per carded figure, and I pulled out, and there were probably 30
You
of
should have
them
had
in
him
there.
hit me
Yeah.
up first and just sell me all that stuff.
I know. So anyway, the point of this really is, right, like I love this place I was very fortunate that my parents were collectors and had the foresight. That box sat in their garage in the rafters you guys know the weather here. They just put it away because they just thought there might be something there later. And so sure enough, my brother doesn't care as much about toys. I'm obviously off the deep end. And so the box, as much as my wife hates it, still sits in our basement in my collection today. So again, the nostalgia is just a big part. And here's proof that we actually played with it. And, it's like thousands of dollars less because we played with it. But
Ruined it.
I was going to say. And if you look really closely, I always love this. In the top right corner, you'll see the Kenner Superpowers, the Dark Side Destroyer, which was part of my dad's collection, actually. So that, again, it's just, we all get into it for different reasons. I found these pictures, we were clearing out some stuff from my parents' house, and I found these that were too perfect to not put in there. So it's just a good nod to...
Is that a black version of the Conquest X30? What is that plane on the lower left side?
Oh, yeah.
It looks like
That actually might be. Is that an Air Raiders?
Oh, it's Air Raiders?
They did. They had a toy very similar to that.
That was a Joe one. I can't
But
remember.
it looks like G.I. Joe because the
Yeah.
back thrusters. But I don't
you're
remember a black version of the Conquest.
It's like purple. It's like purple and like black,
purple.
like honeycomb type print on it. I still have that too, but
So they made like a Cobra version of it?
that's right. Yeah, I can't remember the name.
Oh, there you
I
go,
never,
yeah.
but I don't remember that.
Because
Yeah.
Cobra
It's
was
got like
always
the
like
scales
that.
on it or whatever.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
like a scale painting, basically.
All right, so kind of getting into that again, just kind of a nod to how people get into it, and so really not everybody's journey is the same, but again, we try to just model this as kind of maybe the most affordable to probably the least affordable towards the end. But really, not everybody, but you kind of start with loose figures, right? And so like when we're talking vintage stuff, there's a whole range of things you can get. You can buy loose figures for out of a quarter box at a garage sale or at a flea market or whatever it might be, and then you can go all the way up to, like you see Yak Face here from the original Kenner Star Wars line. Just using that example because he's graded, so that's a high grade one. It was like an 85, so something like that's like $500 or $600 or whatever it might be.
Yeah, even loose figures can be, like you said, anywhere from almost free to you could still spend thousands if you wanted to.
What's the craziest loose figure that's come through your hand?
Oh God, both of us have had some. We'll get into the deeper stuff that we've gotten into. That's like just in this last collection I found there was a couple of loose turtle figures that were $200 plus for a single figure.
Yeah.
But now getting into the type of stuff that we get into that's on the farther end of these slides, like we've both seen figures that can go into the six-figure range. Like, not that we've had personally, but like friends of ours have bought, spending $100,000 at the high end of the collecting market is not that, well, it's rare, but there's lots of figures in the 10,000s range, lots of figures start getting up, like the really high end stuff for loose figures can get into just insanity. But there's something for everybody, and everybody's just got to kind of collect within their price range. There's a lot of rich people that collect toys. Is the one thing that the more you follow the communities, the more you're active in this stuff. Just like with comics, where the people that are at the high end of the comics are on a whole different playing field. They play in a different game than everybody else is. The same thing goes for toys. If you really that Yak Face is a good example of just it's kind of a common figure, all things considered, but those are going to be $500-600 at least just for that figure without the package. With the package,
in that kind of condition,
yeah, exactly, in a good condition,
you can find one where like all the paint is off the hand. You're talking like a $200. So one of the big things, especially the stuff, it's just like comics. It's just like you said, it's just like comics, and especially when you get to the really high end stuff, so much of that stuff changes hands behind the scenes. You never hear about it. That doesn't go through an auction house.
No.
So it's a little hard to track. But as we go through this, we'll try to just for context, just because I think it's helpful to see. The Leo here. Maybe $5 to $10.
Yeah,
So.
Incomplete like that, probably $5.
Yeah.
The accessories start adding tons to a lot. Like that's one of the biggest things with loose figures on most toy lines. Is a lot of the times the accessories are going to be more valuable than the figure because it's really common to have kept that, Leonardo figure. You throw them in a box, put the box in your, your garage, your attic. It's all the stupid little accessories, the swords, the throwing stars. Those are the ones that when you're playing with, you lose. And for loose figures, that's a very key part of the overall collectability and value is just all the accessories and having it being 100% complete.
So that's why they put the stars with the turtles.
Seriously.
That's right.
Now you got to go buy another one because you lost all the fun parts to it.
So from there, you've got a lot of options. So we just threw some examples on here, but from different toy lines, trying to hit kind of everybody's preference, if you will. So package stuff. It's just like comics in the sense that condition is key, right? You can find a comic that's been folded in half 4 times or shoved in somebody's pocket. It's going to be a little bit more affordable than one that just got pulled out of a shipper box, right? And is dead mint. It's going to grade a 9.8 or whatever. And so the same is really true in toys. So condition is just everything in these. And so we kind of, this is just a mix of toy lines, but if you get something with a crease in it, right, that's going to knock some money off. You get like the G.I. Joe figure on the right. The Desert Trooper, again, high-grade examples are always just going to command a little bit of a premium. And this is kind of the natural progression, right? Somebody will put a loose figure set together, and then they might move on to their favorite carded ones, or they want to do a full carded run.
And for the average collector, too, it seems to be a lot of people fall into one or two categories. Either they like to just collect loose, mostly complete stuff, for the type of people that want to set up all the little displays and have their own little dioramas, or army build something and have just shelves full of loose collection. Or there's the other side of the fence where they want them all in package. Like I'm personally a packaged, you are too, right? Mostly, like I always like the look of the card art, the colors. It reminds me of going into a toy store back in the 80s or back in the early 90s when that stuff would still blow me away. So I've always tried to have my personal display with as many classic carded 80s and stuff like that. So
one, I guess, kind of intricate thing that's not always obvious to people that are just getting into it, right? So, condition is a big part, but there are a lot of little things. So if you look at like on the Superpowers, on the Wonder Woman, you can see like the hang tab, right? So where this would have hung on a tab in the store, that hasn't been punched out. So that tells you that was never really actually hanging in a store. So they might have had it in a bin or something else.
Or pulled directly from a box, considering the condition that it's in. Like people were collecting this stuff back in the 80s and whatnot too. There's a lot less than nowadays, but there was still people out there looking for the nicest examples they could get and holding on to them. So
sometimes you'll see like an example like this, is going to bring a decent premium compared to probably the average. The things like the price stickers as well, right? So it seems like such a silly little thing that can be easily overlooked, but the highest condition, no price stickers, without the punch out of it. So basic card's complete, there's no sticker on it, in flawless condition are always going to bring the highest dollar amount. That's something that sometimes some people it clicks and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. It's a great looking card. I don't want a sticker on it. I don't want to detract from it. There are people that love the sticker, right? They love I've seen people that collect only. They had a Lionel Toys or whatever, like up the street as a kid, and they only will collect figures that have a Lionel sticker on them, or a Toys R Us sticker, or whatever. You've got other people, the G.I. Joe on the right came from a friend of ours out in California. He only tries to collect stickerless, unpunched when he can, and high grade. So obviously that one's punched, but no sticker, and it's a high grade. So again, it's just everybody's got their own flavor, and you just kind of find the whatever it is that you're into and go from there. So these are just a couple more examples. Vehicles. I will say, a lot of the vehicles are probably a little bit harder to find sealed, unopened. You'll see a lot more carded figures probably than you will vehicles. Mm-hmm. And again, the grade and condition is kind of everything on this. So these get into a little bit more kind of unique, and not every toy line has mailers available.
A lot of them do.
Especially
the 80s stuff. And a lot of it, most people wouldn't even know about them because maybe only like Sears would offer it as a mailer, one specific store would offer them and stuff like that. So you're getting a little more obscure, but even more collectible here.
Yeah, so a lot of these would come from a variety of like, whether it's JCPenney or Sears or whatever, that would come from mail-in offers, right? So you're mailing in from a catalog, or there might be an exclusive, deal that you're redeeming. Just, comic books have the same offers and things like
Cut
that.
your proof of purchase out and send in X amount of them and get something for free.
Yeah,
So
so
I have a question.
Yep.
If you were collecting the toy and wanted the perfect box, but yeah, in the 80s you had to clip out the
Oh, yeah.
the mailer to get the exclusive.
And you'll
greater
see,
figure. It's
I've
like,
seen
what
a
are you
lot
doing?
of collections
Yeah.
that there'll be a bunch of carded figures that are all in great condition, but they've just got the proof of purchase cut. They would, be buying these, cut that out, and then throw it in a box and ship away, send that away to get whatever it was that was the free one. So that happens a lot, that
Yeah.
people were getting it just for that.
G.I. Joe was big like that.
Yep.
So were the Transformers.
yeah, very much.
Okay, even without the package, could it still be worth anything?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, these are tricky because these are really unique. But just like Adam said, with loose figures, if they're complete in good shape, those are always going to bring a bit more of a premium. It's not going to be as much as something in the package, but something like this, right? So depending on what they are, the box is relatively simple. So this is one area where it can be a little unique. Some people will buy these boxes sealed, not opened, and then they'll just grade them this way. So I mean, they've never been touched, and people open them. There's a whole big controversy on whether that's okay or not. So I won't go into that. But I mean, the figures here, right? If I look at you're going to test my knowledge of value. Let's go with the R2. So a loose R2 like that, in good shape, is probably $30.
Yeah.
$40.
Good sticker.
The sticker's nice, it's white, that sort of thing. But just being in the baggie like that, that's probably 125 to 150.
I got 150 off of the last one that I had sold, where it's a sealed baggie, where it's just an R2 in a baggie. That'd still be considered a packaged, sealed version of it.
So not a whole lot of difference, but again, condition is such a big part of it, right? Again, very much.
But then you jump up to that mailer, the 3-pack when you got them all complete with the box. Those value. I'm guessing thousands for something a lot of these.
So if I think about this, right, I could buy right now. We could go on eBay and we could buy those 3 figures for $30, $40 in good shape, loose. This box and those being in the baggies, that's $2,000 probably. The bottom one, because it's got Vader and the 2 stormtroopers, so it's just a classic. The droids one is tough, but this one just being very classic with the catalog too. I mean, that's probably in the $2,000 to $2,500 range. And here you've got Vader, probably $30, and these are $20 a piece or something like that. So there is a really big difference. But the big deal is even those in baggies are worth a lot of money without the box. So it gets very interesting.
Yeah.
And Star Wars stuff, I'll be honest, I said this the last time we did this.
No.
Star Wars stuff is completely insane. So both of us, I would say, primarily collect Star Wars.
That's all I collected for 6 or 7 years till I got priced out of it.
Yeah.
There was last couple of years have been brutal on the pocketbook if you wanted to collect medium to high-end Star Wars stuff. It's always been expensive. It's been always one of the most expensive toy lines out there. But with the Disney purchase of it, the new movies and stuff like that, there's a lot of new collectors and a lot of investors that got into Star Wars. And so now the market's just ran out of control.
Most unique Star Wars figure you have?
I got a bunch of foreign stuff that would be my most unique.
Some of them are coming, I think. Too.
And we've got some good pictures. I've got a one rare foreign variant that's probably a one of a kind card
your goal
back.
the Boba Fett?
What's that?
Is your goal the Boba Fett prototype?
I know. Years ago, if you would ask me that same question, I would have told you because 3-4 years ago, realistically, if I saved my money, if I sold some other stuff, if I budgeted, if I planned, I could have maybe afforded a rocket firing Boba Fett. 4 years ago, if I'd stopped buying toys, sold a bunch of other stuff, I could have probably afforded one. Today, there's no way in bleep that I would even consider trying to get one. The last one sold for
30,000.
No, 76,000. 76,000 was, and 30,000 wasn't that long ago, but they're already up in the 50 to 70,000 now, and they seem to be going up. That's not even close to it wasn't that long ago that a rocket firing Boba Fett was $15 grand, which is a ton of money for something like that. but it's doable. You know, if you know that that's what you want, if that's your holy grail, and you're working towards it, you sell other toys, you make it happen. But yeah, nowadays, the last like 2 years, it's just the prices just keep doubling and keep doubling. I'd love to have one, but like a rocket firing Boba Fett is awesome. I would never not want to have one, but it is the most common figure for. You would think that it would be rarer for. There's what, almost 100 of those known to
There's
exist.
like 110 examples.
Yeah.
Roughly 100, but over 100 for sure.
Yeah,
that
and
have
that's
been
like
documented
super
about.
common compared to so many other things that there may be 10 of known to exist that cost a fraction of that. And then you get into other toy lines and you can get something that is infinitely more. You can get a one-of-a-kind item from a different toy line and spend maybe a couple $100 on it. You know, so like I'd love to have one, but Star Wars, vintage Star Wars at that high end, it's a rich person's game, 100%. Like those are when we're talking the tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands, everything from there is Star Wars related.
That was the other one I was going to ask. The yellow lightsaber.
Oh, the double telescoping?
Yeah, so this is another, and I don't know comics super deep, so I'm trying to make some comparisons so you guys understand it, but or makes a little bit more sense to kind of your forte. So this is our Luke Skywalker, right? Luke came in 2 different versions. He had a lightsaber that was one solid piece of plastic that would extend out of the arm, and then in the very earliest versions this was a 2-piece lightsaber, so that you had the barrel. And then you had a very thin filament that filled the barrel, and so it would come out of his arm, and then the filament would extend further. And so this, you can see, is when it's in his hand, and it basically touches the ground because it's so long. And the other version is half the length or so. So that was a production change that Kenner made. They just decided these were breaking very frequently. They had a lot of quality issues, so they scrapped that, moved to the solid 1-piece saber. And so because this is the early version, it's harder to find, less of them survived, all that fun stuff. A condition like this, not graded, standard lightsaber, the more common version is going to sell for $100 to $150. The double telescoping version like this is probably, I would say, $1,300 to $1,500 or so.
Easy.
So it's a
and it's just for the saber is all of the value on that one almost. So.
Yeah, and the same is true. So this is the Jawa, another good example of just a different variation. So if you want to, obviously you can see cape differences here. So this is kind of your standard US Kenner. So this is what we would all have as a kid. This is the Lili Ledi, the made in Mexico version. So it had the 1-piece robe with a 1-piece hood. So it's a removable hood Jawa. This is a vinyl cape Jawa. And so this is probably, I don't even know if it's the rarest. This is probably the rarest one of all.
Yeah, between those two, the Lili Ledi, the Mexican one, and the vinyl cape Jawa, those are both like the Ledi would be definitely rarer, but they're both in the same value. Probably 1,200 plus for a good condition one. And then if you want to get even crazier, there's not a picture of it, but there's the vinyl cape Jawa. If you get the Toll Toys version, which was only released in Australia, that's a little bit different color of the cloak. And super common spotting. The plastic that they used in the production of it in Australia, like 99% of them have like these spots all over it, and that's how you can tell that it's an authentic one. And those go for like $2,500 to $3,000 for So variant collecting, it's one of those things that you can go as right on the surface as you want of just going for the obvious stuff, or if you've got deep pocketbooks and you want to get crazy on it, you can really dial down into just the super obscure, super rare differences. Like if you had a Jawa that has purple stitching instead of this brown stitching, that one's what, like a $500+ Like Jawas, there's a lot of variants. You got to be crazy to try to go deep into those.
It's just an interesting example. So like it's probably harder to see from back there, but like I guess what we wanted to prove or kind of show with this slide was, just things that seem to an outsider, especially like
big
a
eyes
relatively
and the
small
little
difference.
eyes.
Yeah, you'll see like, this guy's eyes and this guy, these are much smaller than those two. And so like people will pay a little bit of a premium for the smaller eyes. Like Adam said, the stitching, so how they would actually make the capes. I think there's something like, I'm sure I'm going to be wrong on this because it changes every day, but like I think there's like 7 different shades of stitching that they use to make these capes, and people really care about that. So if you're a big variant collector, I mean, people will drop a lot of money to get the right color of stitching that they don't have. And some people, their whole collection is based just off of the light, small variations, which even to today, I mean, there have been interviews with like Kenner employees who get asked questions about these variations because us collectors are just obsessed with them, and they pretty much just laugh because they say it's just a production variance, right? The factory just ran out of brown stitching, so they threw purple in the machine and ran the Jawas that day. But the collectors don't care; they'll pay for it, and so like it's just an interesting thing to chase now. But it, you know, I mean, I've seen people's displays with every shade of stitching and Jawa. It's kind of cool, right? It tells a little bit of a story, and it's not for me. Like I probably wouldn't do it for my collection, but the stuff that I do, other people don't care about either. So
it's one of those common things. If you can collect however crazy you want to get, you can definitely do it.
That's what I thought was cool in the toys that made us, the Star Wars one, because they just showed Luke's and how they were like, well, we just didn't paint the hair the same.
Seriously.
They didn't really think anything of it.
Yeah, Jim Swearingen is where a lot of the information. So if you watch the Toys That Made Us, Jim, who's on there, I mean, people have pulled a wealth of knowledge out of him. Ron Salvatore, that's in there, is probably one of the most well-known collectors. I mean, his collection is absurd compared to. I mean, that's an awesome show. I will say.
Yeah, they're all really good. If you guys haven't ever watched that, if you have any interest in
season
toys,
3 here shortly.
Yep.
They are. Yeah, they are. So these are kind of interesting and cool. I don't know if there's a good comparison in the comic world, but these are what we call like errors. So things that happened mostly by human error, right? There's a lot of manual intervention in the process to make these, and so sometimes just an accident, sometimes it was just churning out so much product. They seem crazy, they seem like, you know, I know I think like print and, you know, like even the staples on comics, right, can adjust the value dramatically if they're not perfectly centered. But in the toy collecting world, things get really weird when you get into errors, right? So like, I mean, some of these are obnoxiously crazy, right? So you got like Boss, who clearly when they put this card so the nest or the bubble would sit in a steel nest, and they would put the card down on top of it. They use a press to seal the whole thing off. And so clearly when this card got loaded, it got loaded upside down. They sealed it up wrong. It went to the store. Somebody bought it like that.
There is not many examples like that of the upside down one. You see it in a lot of toy lines. You'll pop up a couple. But there was pretty good quality control at Kenner back in the day. That's what makes this stuff exceedingly rare. Like, I think I've seen probably 4 total upside down bubbled figures like that, of different characters. They're not common.
Yeah, and if you'll notice, the photo credit down here is from a mutual friend of ours who has way more money than either one of us do, so that's how we got these pictures for you. But yeah, just example, like, you see the Jawa on the Boba Fett card, Boba Fett on the Death Star droid card.
Those 2 top ones
those are big. Yeah.
I'm thinking that was like close to 10 grand is what both of those went for. Right?
What was the defects with them two, with the Death Star?
So on these 2?
Yeah.
So
that one was pretty incredible too.
It's really hard to see, but if the torso, and this picture's probably not good enough.
One has C-3PO and the other has... Yeah, that's why.
So what's funny, right? So this is the actual Death Star droid. This is the exact figure. Yeah. This is an 80, or this, I think that's a 75 even, I don't know. Let's pretend like that's like $500, right? Yeah. It's probably not, but maybe $400 to $500 for this version. It's a nice condition. It's great. It looks great. Presents well. This one, no, you nailed it. Has got a C-3PO torso. And so they used the wrong torso. C-3PO was gold, right, instead of silver. So they vac metaled it in silver instead of gold, and they used it to make a Death Star droid. So this is a huge error. I mean, this is a big deal. Like you said, the quality control was pretty spot on.
I think that might be the only one where it was the wrong body part used on the figure, and so that is.
This one I think sold for like $8,700.
Yeah, I was thinking just under $10,000 for that one.
Yeah.
What's up?
Yeah.
So, speaking of errors, would something like paint mishaps also work?
Not nearly as crazy as this, but those are still super collectible. And actually, I just saw a couple pop up on discussion, like especially on vintage Star Wars. It's less so on a lot of other toy lines, but a mispainted arm or an unpainted one. You're not going to be talking thousands of additional value like these ones are, but you would normally add probably a 20 to 50% premium over the normal value, depending on how crazy the rarity is or how obvious it was. Like one of the ones I saw was the entire torso was unpainted, so it really stood out. Like something like that, you'd easily be asking maybe a 50 to 100% increase in the price just due to the fact that it's cool. It stands out on the shelf. There's hundreds of thousands of Star Wars toys out there. To be able to have that one that's, or of any type of toy, to have that one that's a little more unique, that stands out a little more from the rest of them, is definitely going to be collectible in comparison to the standard ones.
Yeah, I have Anakin Skywalker who has just one eye that's on the corner.
And stuff like that, it's definitely worth keeping, because if there's always going to be a premium just to have something a little different than the rest.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right. So this is going to be the hole that I dove down for many years, is the foreign stuff. We weren't the only country, obviously, that got these toys, and there was a lot of different countries that had either official releases or bootleg releases that are both extremely collectible in almost any toy collecting, market. I was personally into Star Wars, but I dabbled with a lot of other stuff. So here's a couple of examples. This one on the left, this is a glass leak. That is from Brazil. It's an officially released toy in Brazil, but they made their own. They had their own molds. They made their own toys. Where like a lot of times they would get something shipped over, so they'd be making the exact same thing as what was made here. But some companies or some countries, they would just make their own from scratch. This is a really good example of that, because that C-3PO looks completely different from the Kenner C-3PO. But this would have been released in, I think, 86, 87 was when the glass leak got the licensing to do Star Wars. And they had a full run of like 16 different figures, I think, that came out on that with a really crazy card back. That's one of the things that really got me with the foreign stuff, is the cards were just so different, so radically different across the different countries and the different places. You got the Action Force, which is what G.I. Joe was called over, in Europe and stuff like that in a lot of different countries, because G.I. Joe just didn't really click, so they went with the
American Hero.
Yeah, exactly. Real American Hero was tough to sell in, Korea and China and stuff like that. So,
interesting fact: GI Joe actually was made in Japan when it first started out, and then they were shipped over here.
They keep bouncing back and forth.
So,
like this. So with the Action Force there, they still use the same names and stuff like that, but obviously different card back, different name in this specific toy line. And over on the right side, that would be a Korean G.I. Joe. So they went with G.I. Joe still with that one. They dropped the Real American Hero, obviously. But again, the card art, the design of them is just really unique, really stands out. And this is another one of those rabbit holes that is deep as you want to go, as crazy as you want to go. Mostly the biggest difference is going to be in the packaging, but even like that last example with the Jawas, some of these are going to be exactly the same, some of them are going to have different variations based on the country that released them and stuff like that.
And you were kind of right on that. So also comic books, they also did that too, where they would push them out too, both in Canada and many other places too, and they would just change it just ever so slightly, but keep the covers almost exactly the same.
just to appease the markets that they were doing. This is another section of the foreign stuff. These are going to be your bootlegs. So all those other ones, those are all the officially licensed. A lot of countries had official licenses of these major toy lines that we know. A lot of countries didn't, or even if they did, there would still be some entrepreneur there that wanted to make some extra money and bootlegs his own toys. Like that Star Wars one over on the right side, when you would ask what are some of my most unique Star Wars ones, that would easily be up there on my list of rarest Star Wars items in my collection. That is a Russian bootleg, because back when Star Wars was fresh and new, they didn't have Star Wars in Russia. They couldn't import the toys due to tariffs, due to trade restrictions, whatever was going on back in the day. You couldn't get a Kenner Star Wars toy in Russia unless it was like smuggled into the country. So somebody took one of the toys, and for the Russian one, it's kind of even crazier, because back in this would have came out in I think 88 or 89 was when that toy was created. That was the only Star Wars toy available outside of stuff getting smuggled in small bunches. they made 4 different variations of that card back, but they only ever released that one figure, and it's an AT-AT driver. And he's painted silver. He's just a full silver figure, his own sculpt. They released him on 4 different card backs, but they made no other figures for the line. If you wanted a Star Wars toy, a vintage Star Wars toy in Russia back in the day, unless you had somebody bringing them over from a different country for you, that was the figure you could get, and that's it. It was the only one that they made. I don't know for whatever reason. In the 90s, when they started bootlegging the Power of the Force 2 stuff, when the movies came back out, they started making more figures, but that AT-AT commander or AT-AT driver, that was it. The Predator in the middle, that's going to be a newer one. That's another Russian one that I have. A lot of these are just going to be the type of things that you'd see just in little knick-knack stores or just in little flea market type of things. Whereas like the one on the right, that would have actually probably been in stores back in the day, but in very, very limited quantities. Over on the left, the Skeletor there, that's going to be a Yugoslavian Skeletor, I believe, and the quality of these is going to be a lot lower. They're so terrible, they're beautiful, is kind of how they are. Like when you see this, it's in a crappy plastic bag that's stapled onto a piece of cardboard that has some random Masters of the Universe stuff on it, and the figure is super low quality. It's like a blow mold, really cheap, really thin plastic, but it's incredible. That was the type of stuff that I just love to collect. I've still got a like that's what the majority of my collection is the bootlegs and the foreign stuff, because I just think it's really visually stunning items.
The bootleg for the Star Wars one, he actually didn't even use the Star Wars for the background. He
No,
actually used Star Trek and actually
Yep,
Battlestar Galactica.
And there's like 4 different versions of that. One of them, the card back that they used, was from this Russian Star Wars book where they released a book in Russia that you could read the Star Wars story, and he just took the image that was on the cover of that book and printed it off on cardboard, and that was the second variation of the AT-AT card. So, and then there was one more that whoever was making them would just take whatever he had.
Yeah, because
and
the ships that they have in the back is from Battlestar Galactica.
And people probably didn't even know any different. They didn't even care. They were just happy to get a Star Wars toy and have a little part of the magic that was the Star Wars.
But that one was always my favorite because it always chuckled me that they did that right in the behind, and nobody could notice.
Quality control was not their big.
No, they were just like, just push it.
So this gets into kind of a less of maybe the figures, but more around like the kind of like point of purchase displays, the store displays, and kind of advertising pieces. So this is one that's always, again, I'm not crazy deep. I've got a handful of kind of favorite comics and things like that, but this is always something that's fascinated me between toys and comics. Like I feel like a lot of the like point of purchase and like store displays and the stands and some of the racks get a little bit more expensive from a comic perspective. From a toy perspective, these are like gold. I mean, the people go crazy for these. So some people don't even collect the toys; they just collect the displays. So what you're looking at here on the left, the bigger picture is the original 12-back bin header. And so this was just a piece of cardboard that had the exact same print on it that you see here, and it would sit on top of a cardboard bin that just had kind of like slanted sides, and had a little plastic insert, and they would just have rows of the carded figures in front of them. It would sit on a counter or a shelf inside of a store, and this is literally just it's half of the display. It's just the top part. And these, I mean, this one's in rougher condition, but I mean, these bring a lot of money. Just
I was gonna say, probably what, $1,500 plus for the 12-back one.
And you guys have the pushed one where they did the one for the Boba Fett.
Yeah.
The one where they were actually pushing it for when they first came out with the Boba Fett, and then they had to do the recall for it.
The big thing with these two is they're getting so rare and so collectible because it's the type of stuff that nobody thought to keep back in the day. Most of these, we're not doing the free Boba Fett offer anymore. Tear that down, throw it in the trash. Some Kmart employee or whatever is just doing their job, throwing it out. But the ones that were kept, because of, the rarity starts really getting crazy on those. So
I think we're probably a little behind.
Yeah, we should probably.
We'll go through these a little quicker, but this is like, I'll tell you right now as a disclaimer, we're getting into the stuff that both of us could talk for days and days and days. This is primarily the stuff that we both collect. So a lot of that is just kind of, again, a glance into how we got here. So we'll go through some of these a little quicker, but I would encourage you, if there's something interesting, just stop us, because we can definitely give some more context. So So we went through kind of all the toys, the displays, and like how everything is, post, it went into a store, somebody bought it, now we're collecting it here. What we'll go through now is kind of we'll call I don't want to say the real high end, some of it's not as unaffordable, but a lot of this stuff these are the prototype pieces. So these are the pieces of how do you go from, okay, I had this idea for a really good action figure or a toy, and how do I take that to the market? How do I get it to a store so a kid or a collector or anybody can even get their hands on it? So this is really just kind of walking through the process, and there's some interchangeable bits in here, but so really it starts with a concept. So
Oh man.
this piece, I don't know if anybody know who that is.
I believe it's from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
So this is from an artist, his name is Errol McCarthy. He did all of the Masters of the Universe cardback art. He did a lot of work on the Turtles line and everything else. You can see, well, you can't probably read it, but just take my word for it. It says Ninja Pig at the bottom. And so this is the original Bebop concept drawing. So Playmates Toys went to Errol McCarthy and they said, hey, we got this idea for this really awesome pig. He's going to be a ninja. We need you to draw him. And so this is how Bebop started.
The only reason why he got the glasses and everything else later is because of the just 80 time.
That's right.
So they pushed it later on.
So obviously he changed a lot, right? I'm going to give her a crossbow. He wasn't wearing like a ninja garb, but he definitely, this is a really cool piece. I was really fortunate to have a chance to buy this. That's kind of where it all starts, right? So somebody took an idea and they put it on paper, and now we kind of started doing that.
Yeah.
So from there, and we're going in through a whole bunch, we intentionally put a lot of different stuff in here to kind of, maybe we'll find something that you like.
Crash test dummies.
Crash test, I like your style, man. This is awesome. So this is packaging artwork. So we went from a concept, somebody just drew it, they just put the pencils and ink on paper, and here, this is all airbrushed artwork. So this is a huge piece. This is probably like 2 feet by 3 or 4 feet wide. And this artwork was all drawn and airbrushed, and that was then shrunk down to create the box that the toy would come in. So this one is a really unique one because this is actually the 3D model for the toy. So before they went to production with the toy, this is the model that came out for that same kind of IndyCar.
And packaging art is, you could find some cool stuff out there for kind of reasonable, but getting into especially like the more popular toy lines and stuff like that, packaging art is just like artwork for comic books. Original comic book artwork, especially like a cover or something like that, that starts to become, one of the pinnacles of collecting. Packaging art, the original hand-drawn packaging art for toys is, I would say, one of the most sought after, one of the hottest markets in the collectibles, because most of it is going to be one of a kind. Most of it, especially you start getting into stuff that, the He-Man stuff, Star Wars stuff, I couldn't even imagine the prices some of that stuff would get. But even like the secondary lines that are still popular, it's a cutthroat market, and this stuff is because you don't see it pop up for sale. And this piece of art would have been the beginning of every box that was ever released of that toy.
Actually, I think we get right. There's
another one.
Yeah,
there you go. That's
sorry about that. So this is obviously the actual production package that artwork turned into. And so again, for size reference, the pictures don't really do it justice. But I mean, this piece of art is probably, I don't know, it's 2 feet tall or so by 3 feet wide.
But it was made to display to a complete boardroom of people and everything, so they could be able to.
This was just for the package.
Yeah, this would have been taken and then scanned and scaled down to the size. So they would just contract it out of, okay, so and so artist, we need you to draw this, and it's going to be, and then they would take that, slap on the logos, slap on everything else, do like a paste up over the top of it, and then scan that, and then that would be, like, a lot of this stuff wasn't even kept, or, some of it would have just been thrown in boxes, because, some of it was obviously taken care of, but a lot of original artwork and stuff like that was, dumpster dived back in the day of somebody, oh, I don't really want to see them toss this out, maybe I'll just put it in my car and take it home with me type of thing.
But so you are right in that so there's a difference between packaging art, which is the artwork that actually made the retail box or the packaging, and then you have presentation art.
And the concept.
That's right.
That's where they're trying to pitch it.
It'd be a pitch material, right? You go to a boardroom, and I think maybe we have some, I don't know.
Here's
perfect.
This wouldn't be so much the presentation, this would be the next step once this was what they give to the designers, the engineers that are actually going to start making the toy. It's going to be a turnaround, they call this, or like the sculpting sheet.
Yep, they're design sheets,
Yeah.
basically. So as the concept went through, right, they picked out, this one might not be the best example, but some of them will have like the Pantone like color swatches here that would say like
The
use
scale
this scale purple.
And is that the 95 series?
this
For
was
the Batman?
yeah, I think like 94, 95
Yeah.
or so.
98.
98.
That's
Yeah.
the Batman detective.
That's what I said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here. But anyway, but yeah, so basically all the specs here, right, are this would go to a sculptor, and so most of these toys now they're all digitally sculpted, but back then they were sculpted by hand. They were sculpted out of wax or clay. Generally, started with clay and then would move to wax. But this would help a sculptor, right? So somebody who's far more talented than either one of us are. Start with a piece of wax and start to build out this actual figure. So this was kind of what the company was saying. Okay, here's what you're going to do. Right? These are your instructions.
All right, this is from the 3D side of things, whereas the concept or the packaging art would be the top end of the 2D style of the paperwork stuff. This is the be all end all of the 3D. This would be the very beginning of the process to actually make the figure. And this is his. So
Another Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle.
Brag about that one for a little bit.
This one's good. Like we're all assuming that we're all collectors in here, but this one really actually gives me goosebumps. It's weird, and I'm a super nerd for that, and I'm sorry. But so this is mine. I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to buy this by a complete fluke. It happened at 4 a.m. one night. I stayed up way too late. I'd go to work the next day, all that fun stuff. But was talking to a guy and ended up buying a whole collection of Ninja Turtle stuff, which is where a lot of this came from. But like Adam said, I mean, this is the wax sculpt, right? So they would a sculptor either hired or internal at a toy company. This was Playmates Toys at the time. So he's an independent contractor that Playmates hired. Would have sent him instructions, said, hey, we need a figure, here's the concept, here's the specs, here's the size, here's everything you need to know, go make the figure. So obviously this is Casey Jones from the Ninja Turtles, who's one of my favorite figures as a kid, one of my favorite characters of all time, of anything.
And from the first series,
Yeah.
toy line that actually produced it. And surprisingly, it didn't even happen until like close to 10 years after the actual comic books came out.
Yeah, it was 88, I think, is when the first
88,
wave came out.
89.
Yeah. So this is the wax sculpt. So this is entirely made out of wax. It's all made by hand. It's a one of a kind. This is the only one. It's the only one that will ever happen. So unfortunately, his bat, because wax it's not as fragile as most people think, but it does wear to weather and over time and things like that. So if you know him well, he had a golf bag and his bat and the clubs and things like that that came with him as accessories. So he did have a bat at one point.
And a lot of times they would, when they go to make the mold with the wax sculpt, the wax inside, it's fragile, and they didn't care. This wasn't something that they wanted to keep and you know, for posterity or anything. A lot of times they would do this and it would get thrown in a bucket and they would move on to the next one, or even seeing some old Kenner stuff. There's stories of this sculptor, he would sculpt something out, they would make the mold of it, and then he would take this sculpt that he just did and use that as the spare wax for the next sculpt that he's doing, where he would take off of this piece of art that he just made, but for him it was just another job. And okay, now instead of going and getting another block of wax from the storage or whatever, he would just take this last toy that he just sculpted and just start tearing off of that one. So like I don't think they thought that the values and the rarity and the desire for this type of stuff would have happened like it did.
Yes.
This is the wax sculpt in the toy collecting community is very, very rarely seen, especially as such an iconic
How'd you
figure.
get his changeable head?
That's
I'm so jealous.
So this is, it fortunately came with him. This was, they were going to have multiple heads, so they're going to have interchangeable heads for the figure, because this is kind of the version, the unmasked version from the comic book, right? But they had said this was too scary. They didn't think it would sell well with kids, so they nixed it, right? So it never actually got made.
Yeah, because it just wouldn't fit with the whole concept behind it.
That's right.
Because of how
That's
big
right.
the heads were and everything.
So this is a good example of something that was just never made. It made it this far in the stage. There's a 3D version of it out, but at some point after this, they said, you know what? No, let's just go with this. And so
that head is like one of the holy grails. Like the whole thing would be, but just that head would be like a holy grail of turtle collecting, because it's an unproduced prototype of one of the most well-known characters in the series. All right, want me to go on to the next
Yeah,
one?
go ahead. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, the comics ran.
Yeah.
All right, there's one more.
Yeah.
So these are a little bit, some people find them interesting, some people are like, what the hell is that, why are we looking at it? So these are, I think they're interesting just because, again, they're a part of the process to make a figure. So we talked about the wax sculpt, right? And I'm jumping around a little bit, but we'll get to that one in a second. So this is a silicone mold that they would have made out of the wax sculpt, right? So the sculptor's done, and they would say, you know what, okay, the detail, I'm happy with the detail, I'm happy with the figure. They would then cast the various parts of the sculpt. And so this is actually, I don't know if you can tell or not, it's an arm. This is actually Hulk Hogan's arm from the WWF, the Hasbro WWF line. And this one's actually done at 2 times the size. So like when they couldn't get enough detail in a scale 1-to-1 version, they would sculpt it at 2 times the size. And then later in the process, they would shrink it down using a pantograph machine to take it from 2 times to 1x.
And they also did even larger for like some of the smaller scale ones, like
right, yeah.
Ertl and stuff like that. They'd be making figures like this. They do it like a 4 or 6 up,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
they're working on these giant ones, so they can really get the detail and the sculpt in there. And then they just shrank it down to the size that it was actually released.
So that's I mean, these are a little bit boring to look at, but they're just a cool part of the process. This one here, this is the molds are really tough to find. You don't see a lot of, this is a wood
I've never
pattern.
seen another mold pattern like that.
So this is actually made, I mean, this is hand sanded, made out of a block of wood. And this is a little bit harder to tell. This is also from the Hasbro WWF line. This is an earthquake figure, but this is actually the mold for the plastic bubble that would hold it to the card. And so if you were to have it, they probably should have put a comparison of the figure next to it, but it's a little bit bigger than the figure, right? The figure would stand next to it, and what they would do is they would basically like heat up a sheet of plastic, vacuum form it to that mold, and then they would pop that right onto the card, and the figure would fit just perfectly inside of it, right? So that's just a neat piece that you don't see very often.
All right.
All right, so
Mutilated it.
and I'm talking so much here, I apologize. But anyway, so here's some good Batman stuff. Batman's a real point of weakness for me. So this is what we'll
I
call.
understand your pain right now.
So this is a hard copy. So after they would make the mold, they would cast resin parts. So these are real strong, much stronger than your normal like ABS plastic, which is like what this would be made out of, or what the final toy would be made out of. So this is made out of a resin or a urethane. You can see a little bit like the hips are pinned. They have metal pins to hold the thing together. Sometimes you'd find these unpainted, just as an example, just to make sure that the detail was right. They'd be used to sign off and say, yep, we're happy with the quality, it looks great. Sometimes they would paint these and they'd use them as like examples for like toy fair or like salesman samples. So somebody would hand paint this and it would look just like Batman.
As far as rarity with these, whereas like the wax sculpts, those are normally going to be one of a kind. They make one and that's it. Maybe make a couple wax casts. With the hard copies, they normally do 6 to 12, maybe sometimes a couple more. Like you said, some of them would get painted, some of them would get sent off for approval. You know, some of them may just be safeties in case one of the other ones breaks, because they're strong, or they're like resin, but they are fragile. If you could drop them, they're crackable, they're breakable, so they maybe make a couple extras. So like, as far as rarity goes, hard copies are very up there on just, they wouldn't have made very many of them. So it's one of those things that there's only a handful known to exist. And just like a lot of the other pre-production stuff, people didn't care about it back in the day. So they may have used it and just been done with it and tossed it out. So
This one's actually interesting. We're speculating a little bit. Nobody's really, we haven't really been able to confirm 100% that it's what it's used for, but if you can tell, I heard somebody say he was mutilated.
Yeah.
He was cut right up the center, which for most hard copies, it's not the case. Like normally it's a one piece, it's just like the final figure. We think this one was cut in half like that, probably to trace on a blueprint when they were making the vehicles. So somebody took a hard copy, an internal hard copy that they have, and said, you know what, we're gonna make the Batmobile, or we're gonna make the Batboat, or whatever. And they cut him in half so they could trace him out on the blueprint in order to make sure that as they finalized the blueprints for the vehicle, that he would fit and sit inside of it. That's what we think. It's hard to say. I mean, we haven't really gotten any employee, I don't know that we'll ever get it confirmed. It's one of the very few, the cut is so precise that it was done, it was machined, there's no question about it. It's just interesting a little bit. This just came up, I think I bought that like last year. and we got some answers on it. And so, I mean, it's, we're still learning more, right? As, things come up, nobody had ever really seen one cut in half, and so again, just kind of
It
speculating.
looks a little two-faced.
The other part was why they were designing them. I was big into these guys, like
Yeah.
seriously. Like, and towards that, they had to take like 2/3 of the toys, and just to get the shooters right,
Yeah.
everything that they mixed with it, they would take their time, make sure that they would the spring loaded would work correctly, it wouldn't mess up and everything. But also towards that, the line detail was actually for also how they also concepted on how they separated out, so it would be perfectly, so the stuffed utensils and everything that he wore could also fit perfectly too. And then it was also a concept towards it would be perfectly percepted.
Yeah.
So you could get both concept of both sides working correctly.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point. So one thing I don't think we added in here was, this is a big comic thing, but Christar, you guys know this?
Yes.
Or Marvel's Christar, right? We actually talked to the sculptor who did that whole line for Remco, and he said the exact same thing. That he's the way that he meticulously sculpted all of those figures. They had a couple dragons and different play sets and things, but he sculpted every single one of those figures. So no matter what figure you had, would fit perfectly in the mouth of the dragon, or it could ride on its back. It could do all these different like action poses. They never marketed, they never advertised any of that. But there was so much thought and planning that went into these figures that nobody ever knew about until we're lucky we talked to the guy, or else nobody would have ever known that. So it's a good point, the attention to detail. This we'll go over just real quick. This is a let's just say a first shot or a test shot. This is made in plastic, so this would be more standard to like what was actually made. Obviously the colors are a little bit, they were going crazy with the colors, but they never produced this figure in these colors. What they would do is that once they had the steel mold made, they would just walk over to whatever injection mold was running at the time, they'd slap the mold in there, they would inject some plastic to make the parts. Didn't matter what they were making, right? They could have been making like My Little Ponies, or who knows, right? Like you don't know where the yellow came from, who knows, but they just ran whatever to test to make sure the mold worked fine, the detail was good. These are a little bit more common. You probably had runs of 100, 200 or so, various non-produced colored plastic and things like that. So this is more on the packaging side. So this is a Star Wars piece. This is from the Power of the Force, so later line. This is obviously everybody's favorite hero, Pruneface. I don't know, nobody probably knows him, but that's which is the only reason why I could afford it, is because nobody cares about Pruneface. So this is a proof card. And so what this was this is basically a print that was done just to make sure that the print was going to come through. The colors looked fine. We get sign off and approval. So we'll go through all the checks. This is there's a whole bunch of different details, but this was hand cut from a much larger printed sheet. So there would have been like 8 card backs on a sheet. They would print these off. Somebody cut them out. This figure was never actually produced on that card back, so he was only made on the Return of the Jedi card back. So these are just very desirable because they never came that way.
Those are some of the most sought after 2D pre-production items in the Star Wars line, is these unproduced proof cards for the Power of the Force, because there was, I think, 20 some of them at least for the characters that didn't get produced on that. And a lot of these, there's only a couple known to exist for each character. So this is, towards the rare end when it comes down to that type of stuff.
Pruneface technically only had, 16 or so? Because it was cut out of the 8 scale, where it was like this to this, and it was like individually cut out.
Like there's a couple, so there are different versions, so like, I won't bore you all, but there's one that has like nothing printed on the back, and then there's one that has the 92 figures on the back, and there's a couple different versions, but I think there's like 6 or 7 of that particular one known.
I've only seen one of them, and it was like really faded. Faded.
Yeah. If you watch Comic Book Men, you can watch
that one's famous. It was on TV.
You can watch me look like an idiot in Kevin Smith's shop. But anyway,
you were on Comic Book Men?
I was, yeah.
Nice.
With that specific item.
They
wanted that on there, so I went and did that, and they didn't buy it, so I still have it. This is a Ninja Turtles. This is the pizza throwing Mikey figure. This is just another example. They just used whatever they could. So they had a card back that would fit. Obviously, it's a Transformers Beast Wars. That doesn't make any sense because it's Turtles and Transformers. So this is a mock-up. So they just did that just to make sure that the cardboard was going to hold the figure. The bubble was big enough. Everything would sit well. This one happens to have a prototype, an unpainted figure inside of it. So just a neat kind of mix of all the different stages, I suppose.
As we're going to, this is getting closer and closer to the final release product. So you start at the wax, you start at the concept art, And as you go, you're getting closer and closer to the actual released one. So this is going to be just kind of some more examples of the first shots on the right, just kind of done up in whatever color of plastic they had. And then on the left, that's going to be one of the painted hard copies, like what he was saying earlier. A lot of times you'll see them unpainted, but they would normally have at least a few super detailed hand-painted hard copies, because these would be used in the toy fairs. They would be used in the photography for like the card backs, for a lot of the older toys, and even for toys nowadays, but mostly for the anything from like the 80s and 90s. You can go look on the card backs, and if you look really close, it always seems like a lot of those, the detail and the level of quality is so much better on the photos that are on the card backs, because they weren't just using a random production figure. They would take the best example that they had, like this one on the left, and this one, it's got maybe some scuffs and stuff like that over the years. But right when that was freshly painted, the colors are going to be crisp. It's going to just be a higher detail because it's done in the resin instead of the plastic. So that's what they would use for their catalogs. Well, not always, but it is a very common practice that's what they would use for all of their advertising and stuff like that too. So the painted ones are a lot rarer to see for the most part than the unpainted ones.
We don't actually have anything you can win, but does anybody know what this is from?
It's Earthworm Jim. That's
Yeah, nailed it.
And what's it from?
Earthworm Jim.
I just actually saw one this past weekend at AMA, Iowa. He has them made on card.
Me and him, we got basically the entire collection of the first series of the Earthworm Jim prototypes.
Did he premiere in the actual animated
the
series? But he wasn't
guy,
in the video game.
No, he was.
He
the
wasn't
main
in the
guy,
video
it's the
game?
fish.
Yeah.
The fish is
Yeah.
actually...
The fish.
That's number 4. That's the henchman is the big cat. The
Yeah.
main guy is the fish, the goldfish in the bowl.
Yeah, that's what.
That's Bob, the evil goldfish, and that's why, like in the video game, the cat was one in that stupid level with the bubble.
Okay.
He's the guy that runs up and down the hallway. So even though he's the bigger character, he's actually the sidekick figure for that specific toy.
I've never seen him like that.
The figure is that he holds it back and there's a button on his back and
Yep, and he'll throw it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Don't tell anybody, but I accidentally threw the hard copy. I think it was before I sold it to him, but he threw it. Yeah.
There's something I gotta tell you. I think there's the little white dog that
You're
I
right.
used to have
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
from Earthworm Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's his name?
What is his name?
You mean
Well, there's the
Earthworm
dog.
Jim's sidekick?
There was the dog, and then there's the cat. Evil the cat.
Peter
right?
Puppy.
And
That was Peter Puppy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
right.
Yep. That's one of my favorite ones. We might even have a
I think it
picture
might,
of.
I think it might be in here actually.
Oh, man.
Got back to some more Batman.
So this is just I'm boring you with Batman stuff again. That's my weak spot. So this is a concept model. So this is made in the model shop in the basement of Kenner, basically toys. So it's obviously why it looks so different. This was also made in the basement of Kenner. Look, this is the production toys, so the one you could buy at retail. So these look really close. But because us toy collectors are fun and weird, this one was
Mostly
actually
weird.
This was shot or made in aluminum molds in the basement of Kenner in Ohio, as opposed to this one being made in the Orient in China. If you have them like up close, you can tell a little bit of difference. Like the quality is just much better on the final version. But just an interesting walkthrough of the different stages of how you go from a kind of a concept and a model to what you could actually buy in the stores.
All right, here's one of my favorite runs in my collection. This is again kind of just giving you a quick rundown of the different stages of the production or the pre-production process. So like on the left side, we've got the proof card, like what he talked about with the prune face. And then the 3 down on the bottom there, this is all for the same figure. Those are going to be different stages of the hard copies. So there's the 2 unpainted ones, done in different style of resin, pinned differently, so that that's just kind of, I'm assuming they're just running off a couple to see what works best. The one on the right is the hand-painted paint samples, so that would have been, the one that would have been used in photography. Chances are, being the paint master, that would have been the one sent to the manufacturer overseas that says this is how we want this toy to look when it's all said and done. And then up above, that's going to be a bagged first shot sample. So that would have been the one after they sent the paint master over. They'd send that back once they started making those figures and say, hey, does this all look right? And then at the final end over on the right side, that's just a standard production one. So it's obviously missing some of the main stages of the wax sculpt and stuff like that, but who knows if that even still exists. But outside of that, this is kind of showing from start to finish on what the actual production would have looked like.
God, you guys got so many good classics.
We've done all right for ourselves over the years for toy collecting.
We'll go through this quick. This is another Turtles piece. So this is Pizza Face, but just showing another example of this is a painted hard copy. So again, it's the resin hand painted. So an artist did that, obviously.
It's a little bit larger too. The resin will always be 8% larger, 6%?
Between 4 and 8%, because they would shrink as they went, the plastic would shrink after the mold, so they made the mold slightly bigger and then it would shrink down. But you can see, this one I just thought was interesting because there are a couple different, just like the Casey Jones had the head that didn't actually get produced. One, the level of detail here is just radically different, right? So if you look at like the knife that's in his front pocket, obviously, they painted the handle. By the time they would have done all this paint, the figure would have been completely unaffordable, I'm sure, for them to produce. And so you see a lot of things got lost from a detail perspective. Yeah, that's right. So there are a couple things that actually were changed just from we probably shouldn't actually do that. So you'll see on the painted version, his finger was cut off because this guy was big about he wanted to cook the pizza.
Well, it's cut off in both. It's only painted on the one, so it's noticeable because his finger is missing on the other one.
Yep, they just didn't add the detail, right? So it was a cost-cutting measure or probably a detail thing.
Yeah, there's probably somebody high up that said, I don't know if we need an exposed finger, exposed severed finger on a toy.
But the toes are perfectly fine. They went ahead and opened up the toes.
It made them a little bit more gruesome. Yeah. So the head on this one is just another great example of last minute change, right? So obviously when this figure was sculpted, I actually talked to the sculptor that made this, and he was very specifically instructed to sculpt a fetus on his head. And that clearly didn't make it to the version that they made. So again, maybe a little bit too much for the stores. They didn't think whatever. So they ended up just sculpting a half over the top of it. They hid the fetus, right? It just didn't ever actually make it. So it just tells the story about what was intended for that figure versus what we got. And I just think it's interesting.
Unproduced prototypes are very sought after. There's a lot of toy lines that didn't get made or a lot of toys that got changed as they went. So most of those are going to be in very, very, very limited numbers. So here's a couple of the ones I've been lucky enough to stumble across. These are the same type of thing. These are completely unproduced. They never made it past the prototyping stage. Whereas the last unproduced one, that was one obviously that got released, but they made some major changes to it to make it more palatable to the market for a child's toy. These two never even probably made it. Actually, no, that's a lie. They made first shots of the one on the right, but the one on the left, they made a wax sculpt and they made the hard copies, and that's as far as that figure ever made. So
the Master of the Universe one?
No, I wish.
Which one was that?
This is actually on the left. This is another Earthworm Jim figure.
Yeah, I know that one is. Yeah.
This one on the right is a knockoff of, well, not even a knockoff, but it would have been kind of a copy of He-Man. It's a very similar style. This was called Tribes. It was done by Mattel in 1991 or 92. They had concepted this entire toy line that would have actually competed with He-Man, and I think that's the reason that they ended up canceling it. It was too similar. But there were all these big muscular tribes. There was 3 or 4 different tribes of good guys and bad guys, and they got everything where they had a full run of, I think it was 12 figures, 2 giant play sets, 4 big vehicles. They spent a lot of time and money prototyping these out. And at the very end, they ended up canceling the entire line. But the big gimmick was that the mask on top is a spring-loaded mask where if you push the button, the mask pops off, and he's got just the regular figure under there. But most of these, there's a couple of them of each of the figures known to exist. And actually, I think that's it. So sorry we ran a little long.
We did run long. Thank you, though. Like you said, you guys get it.
Hey, let's give them a round of applause real quick.
Yeah, if you guys ever have any questions, you can stop down at my shop or shoot either one of us a message. You know, we're pretty active toy collectors in the whole scheme of things, so.
There's one more.
Yeah.
Has anyone seen Ant-Man and the Wasp?
Not yet. It's on my list. I'm hoping to.
Have you seen it?
The ending's pretty good with
Nice.
the toy figure part.
That's
My mom
awesome.
and dad.
Yeah, thank you guys. Sorry we ran a little
Thanks,
long.
guys.
Oh, no, that was good.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So,
And we're happy to take, I'll
Yeah, I'm still
Yeah.
here for a few if you.
yeah,
All right.
yeah.
you guys have
So,
questions or comments or whatever.
so one thing I want to ask you is,
Yeah.
do you think, like the toys that made us, do you think that every, every season that they come out with is just going to ramp up, the demand for each toys? That they pick?
I definitely, I can see, like, it's been a pretty popular one. The big thing, a lot of the toy lines that they've been covering are ones that were already getting bigger,
Popular
or
and more
because,
and
from what I've noticed, doing this seriously for 8 or 9 years at least, it's all about the ages that as this stuff comes out.
He got better.
The people that are in the 30s or 40s are now they've got good jobs, they're making good money, so they start collecting stuff from their
They got
childhood.
401k plans they can steal from. They
Yeah,
can.
seriously, you start getting the stuff that was out in the 90s that now that's hitting the people that were playing with those toys in the 90s are now kind of hitting their stride where they're out there, they're established in life, they realize they have some extra money. I think that's one of the main trends of pushing the desirability of toys.
See, unfortunately, that got me back into buying loose figures of Star Wars.
Yep, that's
And then I graduated to Marvel Legends figures,
Nice.
and I gotta stop. I just gotta stop
Find the
there.
next one. You just keep chasing it.
No, I'm not gonna get into frickin' prototypes. So that's
There's deep
God.
ends you can just dive head first into and go nuts.
If you guys haven't heard, Clone Wars is coming back, so you guys gotta keep getting your Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars stuff is just got.
do you get much into the new Star Wars stuff? Like,
No, I avoid it. I try not to buy any new toys anymore. I buy.
What's
too
your
many
cap?
old
Like, what's
toys.
the part where you say, I won't buy past this type of toy?
It doesn't exist.
Oh, like price wise?
No.
like a little Star
I
Wars.
say price wise, as long as I'm not selling
Yeah.
my house for it, I'm
Like-
There's something that he'd do
For
it
me, I'm a big 80s person, but I won't do anything past 95.
I've pretty
for,
much
like,
completely dialed my collection into. Well, that's a lie. I just kept a ton of that mask stuff that I
Yeah,
just
you
found. But for the most part, I try to stick with. If it's not a prototype, I'm on a one in, one out on my collection in my toy room now. I've got one bedroom that's my toy room, and I'm so out of space that. As I get something new, something else has to go out. So I pick my battles pretty carefully.
but seriously, how many people have you ever heard of over the years that said, "Oh, I'm a mask collector"?
The last couple of weeks, I heard a lot.
Well, yeah. I mean,
There are quite a few. I mean, and it just kind of depends. I guess.
Yeah, seriously.
I mean,
I've made a lot of mask collectors in the last couple
Yeah.
of weeks, and people
I started collecting masks.
like, oh, I didn't really want any of those. But